I knew the axe was swinging before I even walked into the glass-walled fishbowl they call a conference room. You develop a sense for it after 27 years of cleaning up other people's financial vomit. It's a specific smell, a mix of stale boardroom coffee, fierce sweat, and that cheap, woody cologne that men like Brad marinate in to mask the scent of their own incompetence. Brad, the new CFO, man whose resume looked like a LinkedIn buzzword generator, had a seizure, and whose understanding of tax law was roughly equivalent to a hamster's understanding of nuclear physics. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, grinning like he'd just discovered fire, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car and fit him like a hefty bag full of oatmeal. He didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. He was too busy scrolling on his phone, probably liking posts from hustle culture accounts or checking the crypto market while the company burned. "Take a seat, Karen," he said, not looking up. The disrespect was palpable, thick enough to chew on. "Before I tell you how I absolutely dismantled this man's entire existence, do me a solid, hit that subscribe button and tap the up arrow. It fuels my rage tank, and trust me, we're gonna need a lot of gas for this road trip to hell." Anyway, I sat. Leather chair let out a long, exhausted sigh that perfectly matched my internal monologue. So Brad started, finally locking his eyes on me. They were dead eyes. Shark eyes if the shark had an MBA and a daddy who bought his way into Wharton. "We've been looking at the numbers. And frankly, Karen, the old way of doing things, it's antiquated, it's heavy. We need agility, we need synergy." I didn't blink. I just stared at the bridge of his nose. "It's a trick I learned from a forensic auditor in '98. It makes people think you're looking into their soul, but really, you're just wondering if that pimple is going to pop." "Synergy," I repeated, the word tasting like battery acid. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "We're pivoting," he said, leaning forward, flashing that blindingly white veneer smile. "We're moving the accounting department to a third-party logistical firm. Outsourcing, Karen, it's the future. Leaner, faster, cheaper." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a severance package. It was a termination notice, effective immediately. "Pack your trash, Karen," he smirked. That was the line. That was the moment the universe decided Brad needed to die, professionally speaking. "We're outsourcing accounting. Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the stapler at his forehead. Even though the trajectory calculations were already running in my head, velocity x angle equals shattered ego. I just looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. He had no idea. He didn't know that for the last 6 months, I hadn't just been doing the books. I had been prepping for Category 5 hurricane. See, Brad was so busy playing golf with the board members and ordering bespoke business cards, he missed the one piece of mail that actually mattered: the IRS notification. A full-scope, deep-dive forensic audit covering the last 7 years of operations. A $480 million inquiry. It was scheduled for next Tuesday. I was the contact point. I was the gatekeeper. I was the only person in this god-forsaken concrete box who knew where the skeletons were buried because I was the one who dug the graves and planted the flowers on top. "Is that all?" I asked. My voice was steady, flat. Dial tone. Brad looked disappointed. He wanted a scene. He wanted the middle-aged woman to beg, to weep about her pension, to ask how she'd pay for her cat food. He wanted to feel powerful. "That's all." He waved a hand dismissively. "Leave the laptop and the badge." I stood up. My knees popped, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. I smoothed my skirt. I didn't mention the audit. I didn't mention the encrypted files. Didn't mention that the logistical firm he hired was likely a boiler room in a basement somewhere that didn't know a GOP principle from a hole in the ground. "Good luck, Brad," I said. It wasn't a wish, it was a curse. I walked out of that room with the kind of calm that scares wild animals. The office was buzzing, phones ringing, printers jamming, the low hum of 100 people pretending to work. I walked past the break room where the coffee pot had been burning the dregs since 6 a.m. I walked past the cubicles filled with kids young enough to be my children, staring at spreadsheets they didn't understand. I went to my desk. I didn't pack trash. I packed my favorite mug. It said I put the IRS in tears, my lucky calculator, an old Casio that had survived 3 mergers and a spilled bottle of whiskey, and a single red folder. The folder didn't contain company data. It contained my personal notes, my leverage, my insurance policy. Brad watched me from the glass office, arms crossed, looking like the king of a castle built on quicksand. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd trimmed the fat. He didn't realize he'd just cut the brake lines on his own Ferrari while doing 120 down a mountain. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The security guard, old Jerry, looked at my box. "Leaving early, Miss Karen?" "Retiring, Jerry," I said, putting on my sunglasses even though we were indoors. "Effective immediately." I walked out into the parking lot, the heat of the asphalt hitting me like a physical blow. I threw my box into the passenger seat of my beat-up Ford Taurus. I sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of hot plastic and old upholstery. I lit a cigarette. I hadn't smoked in 10 years, but I kept a pack in the glove box for emergencies. This was an emergency, not for me, for them. I took a long drag, watching the smoke curl up against the windshield. Tuesday was 4 days away. I cranked the engine. It sputtered, then roared to life. I put it in reverse, backed out, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. The bridge wasn't just burning, I'd rigged it with C4 and was holding the detonator. And the countdown had already started. You have to understand something about corporate accounting. People think it's just math. They think it's adding columns and making sure 2 plus 2 equals 4. If only it were that simple. In my world, 2 plus 2 equals whatever keeps the CEO out of federal prison. For 27 years, I wasn't just an accountant. I was a glorified janitor for rich people's mistakes. I mopped up the slush funds. I bleached the stains off the expense reports. I Febrezed the stench of bad investments until the books smelled like roses and legitimacy. Brad didn't know about the '08 crash. He was probably in middle school, popping his collar and failing algebra. But I was there. I was in the trenches when the market took a nosedive off the Empire State Building. The previous CFO, a man who drank scotch like it was Gatorade, had panicked. He wanted to liquidate the pension fund to cover a margin call on a side bet he'd made with company capital. I was the one who physically blocked the door to the server room. I was the one who stayed up for 72 hours straight, surviving on vending machine crackers and pure adrenaline, restructuring our debt so we didn't have to lay off 3,000 factory workers. I saved the company. I got a commemorative coffee mug and a good job, sport pat on the back. Then there was the CEO's divorce in 2015. The trophy wife incident, we called it in the dark corners of the file room. Big Boss had been funneling company assets into a shell company in the Caymans to hide them from his wife's lawyers. Who found it? Me. Who fixed it before the SEC decided to turn our headquarters into a crime scene? Me. I buried that mistake so deep you'd need a submarine and a prayer to find it. And what did I get? A 2% cost of living adjustment and a lecture about using too much color toner. See, people like Brad, they see the finished product. They see the glossy annual report with the stock photos of diverse people shaking hands. They don't see the duct tape and chewing gum holding the whole structure together. They don't see me at 3 a.m., eyes bleeding from staring at Excel cells, finding the one decimal point misplaced by an intern that would have cost us $6 million in fines. They thought I was a relic. Karen with her paper files. Karen who refuses to use Slack. Yeah, I refuse to use Slack because I don't put evidence of felonies in a searchable chat log. You absolute pinecones. I kept paper because paper can be shredded. Paper doesn't leave a metadata trail. I was operating on a level of paranoia and precision that these iPad-toting children couldn't even comprehend. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down, letting the wind whip my hair around. My garden isn't really a garden. It's a quarter-acre of aggressively maintained prickly pear cactus and thorny rose bushes in the backyard of a house I paid off 15 years ago. It's hostile vegetation. I like it. It keeps people away. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, spiked with a healthy shot of bourbon, and sat on my back porch. I thought about the audit prep. The IRS agents coming on Tuesday weren't the friendly neighborhood tax helpers. These were the sharks. The Forensic Audit Division. They wear cheap suits and carry briefcases full of subpoenas. They don't want explanations, they want blood. For 6 months, I had been building the defense. I had categorized every receipt, justified every write-off, and cross-referenced every ledger entry with the bank statements. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic armor, a labyrinth of logic that only I knew how to navigate. And it was all encrypted on a secure partition of the server that required a physical RSA key to access. My key, which was currently dangling from my keychain next to a bottle opener shaped like a lizard. Brad had confiscated my laptop. He had revoked my email access before I even reached the elevator. But he hadn't asked for the keys. He probably didn't even know they existed. He thought everything was in the cloud. He thought you could just ask Siri to handle the IRS. I took a sip of my drink and watched a beetle crawl across the railing. It was struggling, trying to carry a crumb 3 times its size. "Drop it, buddy," I whispered. "It ain't worth it." The irony was delicious. If Brad had just treated me with an ounce of human decency, if he had given me 2 weeks, a transition period, a handshake, I would have walked him through it. I would have handed over the map. I would have shown him where the landmines were. I'm a professional. I take pride in my work, but pack your trash? Outsourcing? No, that's a declaration of war, and in my war I don't use guns, I use compliance regulations. I use Form 4562, depreciation and amortization. I use the crushing weight of federal bureaucracy. I pulled out my personal phone. I had the lead auditor's number saved, Agent Miller, man with the personality of a wet sock and the ruthlessness of a honey badger. I had a draft email saved in my personal account, confirming the Tuesday meeting. I deleted it. Let them show up. Let them knock on the door of an empty office. Let Brad try to explain synergy to a federal agent who just wants to know why the 2019 depreciation schedule on the heavy machinery doesn't match the inventory logs. I leaned back in my chair, the wicker creaking under me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. It was beautiful. It looked like the end of the world, or at least the end of Brad's world. I found out later from Linda in payroll what happened right after I left. Linda is a good egg. She smokes Virginia Slims behind the dumpster and hates everyone except her 3 pugs. She's my eyes and ears on the inside. According to Linda, about an hour after I peeled out of the parking lot, replacement team arrived. I pictured it perfectly. A van full of 20-something consultants from a firm with a name like Apex Vector or Stratosphere Solutions. Boys in skinny suits with ankles exposed, wearing loafers that have never seen a puddle, let alone a factory floor. Girls with manicures too long to hit the number pad on a keyboard effectively. They probably marched in carrying iPads and Starbucks cups, looking around the grim, fluorescent-lit accounting bullpens like they were visiting a zoo. Brad apparently gathered everyone for a town hall. He stood on a chair, literally on a chair, and announced the dawn of a new era. He introduced the consultants as the architects of our financial future. I almost choked on my laughter when Linda texted me that. Architects? These kids couldn't build a sandwich, let alone a financial defense against a federal audit. The lead consultant, kid named Tyler or Skylar or some other name that sounds like a craft beer, apparently asked for the transition folder. He wanted the roadmap. He wanted the SOP's standard operating procedures. He wanted the cheat codes. Linda told me Brad walked over to my empty desk. It was clean, immaculate, not a sticky note in sight, just the dust outline where my calculator used to sit. He opened the top drawer, empty. Middle drawer, empty. Bottom drawer, the deep one where I used to keep the hard copies of the oh shit files, empty. Well, not entirely empty. I had left one thing, a single sheet of paper. On it, I had printed a meme. Yes, I know how to use a printer, and yes, I know what a meme is. It was that picture of a dog sitting in a burning room saying, "This is fine." Below it, I had typed 2 words, "Good luck." Linda said Brad's face turned the color of a stepped-on plum. He crumpled the paper and threw it on the floor. "Doesn't matter," he reportedly shouted. "It's all on the server. Get IT to map the drives." Here's the thing about IT. Our IT guy is a man named Dave. Dave lives in the basement server room. Dave wears t-shirts from concert tours that happened before Brad was born. Dave hates Brad. Why? Because Brad cut the IT budget by 40% last month to pay for the new espresso machines in the executive lounge. When Brad demanded access to my files, Dave probably clicked a few keys, took a slow sip of Mountain Dew and said, "Ticket submitted." 24 to 48-hour turnaround. But even if Dave gave them access, it wouldn't matter. The files they needed, the audit prep, the reconciliations, the variance reports, were in the Z drive. The Z drive is a partitioned, encrypted sector of the network that I set up 5 years ago. It's military grade, requires a 24-character password and a physical token key. The password? It's in my head. The token key? It was currently sitting on my kitchen counter next to a thawing chicken breast. So the architects spent the rest of the afternoon staring at folders they couldn't open. Access denied. Permission required. Contact administrator. They were locked out of the castle, and the dragon was already flying away. I spent that Friday night doing something I hadn't done in years. I relaxed, I didn't check my email. I didn't worry about the quarterly close. I made a casserole, a real one with extra cheese and enough sodium to kill a horse. I watched a documentary about serial killers, which felt oddly comforting because at least their motives made sense. My phone buzzed a few times, calls from the office. A text from Brad, "Karen, we need the password for the Z drive." Urgent, I looked at the text. I took a bite of my casserole. I blocked the number. Then another text from an unknown number, probably Tyler/Skylar. "Hi Karen, so excited to pick up the torch." Just a quick cue about the encryption protocols, blocked. I wasn't ghosting them, I was exercising them. They wanted me gone, I was gone, I was a phantom. I was a rumor. I was the whisper in the vents that said, "You shouldn't have done that." I imagined them there, late on a Friday, the fluorescent lights humming, the air conditioning clicking off as the building went into weekend mode, the panic starting to set in. The realization that accounting isn't just data entry, it's a language. And I had taken the Rosetta Stone with me. They had 3 days. Saturday, Sunday, Monday. 3 days to figure out 7 years of complex corporate finance before the feds walked through the door. I poured another glass of wine. "Synergy?" I chuckled to the empty room. "Let's see how much synergy you have with the IRS." The weekend passed with the slow, dripping sweetness of molasses. Saturday morning, I was out in the yard by 7 a.m. There's something therapeutic about pruning roses. You have to be aggressive. You have to cut away the dead wood to let the new growth survive. Snap, snap, snap. I imagined each dead branch was one of Brad's strategic initiatives. My neighbor, sultry Mrs. Higgins, who is actually 80 and wears tracksuits exclusively, leaned over the fence. "You look happy, Karen. Finally kill the husband?" "Better," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of a gloved hand. "I killed my career." "About time," she croaked, lighting a cigarette that looked longer than her arm. "You worked too hard, gave you frown lines." I laughed, a real laugh. The kind that comes from the belly. I felt lighter. The constant, crushing weight of the ledger was gone, but the knowledge of what was coming kept a little smirk playing on my lips. I went inside around noon to check my personal email. There it was, a notification from the Internal Revenue Service. Confirmation of appointment, Field Audit 2's, 9 o'clock a.m. EST. Subject, pre-audit document review. The body of the email was polite, bureaucratic, and terrifying. Dear Miss Karen, last name, confirming our arrival. Please have the following schedules available. Primary contact. Failure to produce. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I just marked it as read and moved it to a folder labeled Not My Circus, Not My Monkeys. See, Brad assumed that because he fired me, the responsibilities vanished. He lived in a world where if you delete the app, the subscription cancels. He didn't understand that the federal government doesn't care about your corporate restructuring. To the IRS, I was still the listed officer. To the IRS, the appointment was set in stone. I wondered what Brad was doing right now. Probably at a country club mixer, holding a martini, telling some other empty suit about how he streamlined the department. He was probably bragging about the money he saved by dumping my salary. Old guard, he'd say, resistance to change. He didn't know the sword of Damocles was hanging over his head by a piece of dental floss and the floss was fraying. Sunday came. Church bells rang in the distance. I didn't go to church. My worship was silence. I cleaned the house. I scrubbed the floors until they shined. I organized my spice rack, alphabetical, cumin next to curry, paprika next to pepper, order, logic, everything in its place, unlike the office. By Sunday night, the texts had stopped. He had given up on asking. They were probably assuming they could bluff their way through it, or maybe they thought the audit was just a routine checkup. A pop-in. They didn't know. They couldn't know. Because the risk assessment reports, the ones with the big red flags and the words substantial liability, were in the Z drive. Monday was a federal holiday for the banks, but not for corporate America. I knew they were in the office. I could feel the vibrations of their panic through the ley lines of the universe. They were probably printing out general ledgers, staring at raw data, trying to piece together a narrative. Hey, why is there a $40,000 payment to Consulting Services LLC every month for 3 years? I don't know, asked Karen. Karen's gone. Well, figure it out. Spoiler, that payment was a retainer for the environmental cleanup crew fixing the chemical leak the company illegally dumped in 2018. It was labeled consulting to avoid triggering an EPA flag. I had the documentation proving it was remediation advice. Without that documentation, it looks like a bribe or a kickback. Good luck explaining that to Agent Miller. I went to bed early on Monday night. I slept like a baby who knows that tomorrow. Village is going to wake up to a volcano eruption. I set my alarm for 8:30 a.m., not to go to work, but to make coffee. I wanted to be awake when the clock struck 9. I wanted to feel the disturbance in the force. Tuesday was coming, and hell was coming with it. I was on my second cup of coffee, sitting at my kitchen island, wearing a silk robe and fuzzy slippers. The sunlight was streaming in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a perfect, quiet Tuesday morning. At 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, I looked at the clock on the microwave. Showtime, I whispered. At that exact moment, 20 miles away, a black sedan, or maybe two, was pulling into the reserved visitor spots at corporate HQ. Doors were opening. Men and women in nondescript gray suits were stepping out, checking their watches, adjusting their glasses. They weren't carrying iPads. They were carrying heavy leather briefcases and accordion files. Weren't smiling. I could see the receptionist's face in my mind. Poor Tiffany. She's sweet, but she panics if the coffee machine runs out of pods. 4 federal agents badging in, asking for the CFO. She probably hyperventilated. 9:05 a.m. My phone sat on the counter, screen down. 9:07 a.m. The vibration started. It was a deep, angry buzz against the granite countertop. I picked it up. Brad Mobile. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. Voicemail. I took a sip of coffee. Hazelnut. Delicious. 9:09 a.m. Brad Mobile. Again. I declined it this time, sent straight to hell. 9:11 a.m. A new number. A 202 area code. Washington, D.C./Federal Government Exchange. This was it. I swiped the green button. I didn't say hello. I didn't say Karen speaking. Hello, a man's voice. Dry. Clipped. Official. This is Agent Miller with the Internal Revenue Service, attempting to reach Karen last name, the designated financial officer for company name. I cleared my throat. I put on my best, sweetest, most confused grandmother voice, the voice of a woman who bakes cookies and doesn't know what a spreadsheet is. Oh, hello, I said. You've reached Karen. How can I help you, dear? Miss Last Name, we are currently in the lobby of your headquarters for the scheduled field audit. We were told you are no longer with the company. He sounded annoyed. Not at me, at the situation. That's correct, Agent Miller, I said, looking at my fingernails. I was terminated last Friday. Outsourced, I believe was the term. I'm currently retired. Silence on the other end. A heavy, pregnant silence. Terminated, he repeated. 3 business days before a federal audit. It does seem like poor timing, doesn't it? I said pleasantly. But the new CFO, Brad, he's a visionary. He has a lot of synergy. I'm sure he can help you. Miss Last Name, the gentleman currently stammering in front of me, claims he doesn't have the encryption keys for the requested files. He claims you took them. Oh, goodness no, I laughed. I left all company property. The encryption keys are for the Z drive. That's a secure partition. I couldn't just leave those lying around. That would be a security violation. They are safely in my possession, awaiting proper handover protocol. Which, sadly, you never got to since I was escorted out by security in 20 minutes. I see, Miller said. I could hear the smile in his voice, not a happy smile, a predatory smile. He knew exactly what was happening. He'd seen this show before. So you are at home, I am, gardening, and you have the keys, I do, in this? Brad, he has no access, none, bless his heart. Thank you, Miss Last Name. Please keep your phone on. Click. I set the phone down. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the kill. 9:15 a.m. Brad Mobile. 9:16 a.m. Office landline. 9:18 a.m. Brad Mobile. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb. The chaos at the office must have been biblical. Imagine Brad, sweating through his expensive suit, the architects frantically typing on keyboards that aren't connected to anything. The IRS agents sitting in the conference room, the same room where I was fired, tapping their pens on the mahogany table, watching the clock. Every minute they waited was a penalty. Every missing document was a fine. Every stuttered excuse was a probable cause for a deeper probe. I imagined the smell of the room now. Fear, pure, unadulterated panic. And underneath it all, the faint, lingering scent of my old perfume haunting them. You know who hates surprises more than accountants? CEOs. Specifically, our CEO, Mr. Sterling. A man who thinks he's a titan of industry, but is mostly just a titan of shouting and delegating. He spends 90% of his time on his boat or at summits in Aspen. He trusts his people to keep the machine running so he can keep cashing checks. He was in the office that Tuesday. Rare, unlucky for Brad. I got the play-by-play later from Linda, who was now hiding in the supply closet texting me updates like a war correspondent. Sterling just stormed into the conference room. Veins popping. Looks like a tomato about to explode. Apparently, Agent Miller didn't appreciate waiting. After about 30 minutes of Brad sweating and the consultants looking up how to audit on Google, Miller walked out of the conference room and demanded to see the signatory authority. That's Sterling. Sterling came down from his penthouse office, annoyed that his morning scotch was interrupted. He walked in, saw 4 federal agents, saw a pale Brad, and saw an empty table where the files should be. What is the meaning of this? Sterling reportedly bellowed. Mr. Sterling, Agent Miller said, his voice cutting through the bluster like a diamond cutter. We are here for the audit. The one scheduled 5 months ago. We sent the confirmation to your CFO last week. Sterling turned to Brad. Brad, I thought Karen handled it, Brad squeaked. I didn't think. We're transitioning. Where are the files? Sterling demanded. Encrypted, Miller answered for him. Your CFO fired the only person with the keys on Friday. Linda said the silence that followed was loud enough to shatter windows. Sterling looked at Brad. He looked at the agents. He looked at the empty chair where I used to sit. Get her on the phone, Sterling hissed. She's not answering, Brad whimpered. Then go get her, Sterling roared, spittle flying. Go to her house. Drag her back here. I don't care if you have to carry her on your back. I don't know where she lives, Brad admitted. Of course he didn't. To Brad, I was an NPC non-player character. I didn't have a home. I just spawned at my desk at 8 a.m. and despawned at 6 p.m. HR, Sterling yelled, get me her file, but here's the kicker. The HR director, a woman named Susan who I've known for 20 years, was out sick that day. I may have texted her on Sunday suggesting she take a mental health day. Susan hates Brad too. The junior HR rep was new. She couldn't find the physical file because Brad had ordered everything digitized, and the digitization project was, you guessed it, incomplete, panic, pure chaos. Finally, Linda, my spy in the supply closet, stepped out. She walked past the screaming CEO, past the weeping CFO, and cleared her throat. I know where she lives. Linda said, I have her address. Sterling spun around. Give it to him, he pointed at Brad. Go now and don't come back without those keys. Actually, Agent Miller interrupted, checking his watch. I think we should come to chain of custody. If you're retrieving sensitive financial data from a terminated employee's private residence, we need to oversee the transfer. Oh, this was getting better. It wasn't just Brad coming. It was a parade. Linda texted me, incoming. Brad, Sterling, and the feds. Eat a 20 mins. Good luck, bitch. I read the text. I stood up. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I fixed my hair. I reapplied my lipstick. Blood red. They were coming to my turf now. No glass walls. No security guards. No corporate bylaws. Just me, my cactus garden, and the absolute, unadulterated truth. I went to the fridge. I took out the expensive cheese. I put the kettle on, not for them, for me. I was going to enjoy the show with a nice cup of Earl Grey. I walked to the front window and twitched the curtain. The street was quiet, birds chirping. A UPS truck rumbling by, but I could hear them. The approach of desperate men, the sound of hubris crashing into reality. I checked my pocket. The USB drive was there, cold, hard, heavy. I sat down in my favorite armchair facing the door, and I waited. My driveway isn't designed for a convoy. It's a cracked concrete slab meant for one sensible sedan and maybe a guest if they pull onto the grass. So when the circus arrived, it was a spectacle. First came Brad's leased BMW, screeching around the corner like he was in a Fast and Furious movie, except sadder. Then came Sterling's massive Mercedes, taking up the entire width of the street. And finally, the ominous black sedan of the IRS agents, parking legally and respectfully 3 feet from the curb. I watched through the blinds. Mrs. Higgins was already on her porch, binoculars out, unfiltered cigarette dangling from her lip. She gave me a thumbs up. Brad got out first. He looked like he'd been through a car wash without a car. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and he had pit stains that were visible from 50 feet away. Sterling got out next, red-faced, barking into a cell phone before angrily snapping it shut. The agents emerged last, cool as cucumbers, carrying their clipboards. They huddled at the end of my driveway, the power team discussing strategy. I could see Sterling pointing at my front door, then poking Brad in the chest. Brad looked like he wanted to vomit. They started the walk of shame. Up the cracked concrete, past the aggressive prickly pears, careful boys they bite, to my front porch. Ding dong, I let it ring. Ding dong, knock knock knock. Karen, open up, it's Brad. Took a sip of tea. I waited 10 seconds, then I stood up, smoothed my robe, I was still in my robe, power move, and opened the door. I didn't open the screen door, just the main door. I stood there, framed by the mesh, looking down at them. Can I help you? I asked, mild concern on my face. Are you selling solar panels? Because I have a no solicitor sign. Karen, cut the crap, Sterling barked, pushing past Brad. We need the keys. Now, Mr. Sterling, I said, clutching my pearls metaphorically. I'm surprised to see you. I thought you were in Aspen. The audit, Karen, Brad pleaded. He looked like he was about to cry. The agents are right behind us. We need the Z-Drive key. I looked past them to Agent Miller, who was standing on the lawn examining my rose bushes. He looked up and nodded at me. I nodded back. The Z-Drive key, I mused. Ah, yes, the encryption token, property of company name. Yes, give it to us. Brad reached for the door handle. It was locked. I can't just give it to you, Brad, I said. I'm no longer an employee. I have to follow proper offboarding protocol. I need a receipt. I need a liability waiver. I need to be sure I'm not violating the Espionage Act by handing over sensitive financial data to civilians. I am the CEO, Sterling shouted. I am not a civilian. Technically, I said, voice dropping an octave. Losing the Grandma Act and letting the steal show through, technically, you're the subject of a federal investigation. And Brad here is a documented incompetent who fired the data custodian 3 days before D-Day. Sterling stopped. He stared at me. He saw it then. He saw the 27 years of disrespect. He saw the late nights. He saw the Karen, fix this and the Karen, handle that. He saw the monster he had created. What do you want? Sterling asked, quietly. I don't want anything, I said. I'm retired. I want to garden. I want to drink tea. I want you off my porch. Karen, please, Brad whispered. They're going to fine us millions. They're going to look at everything. They certainly are, I smiled. And without my index, without my reconciliation logs, it's going to look like a Jackson Pollock painting of fraud in there. You know that $40,000 consulting fee? The one for the chemical leak. Agent Miller is going to find that in about an hour, unless I guide him to the supporting documents. Brad's face went white. Sterling's went purple. You're blackmailing us, Sterling accused. No, I said. I'm consulting. Independent contractor. Very different tax bracket. Agent Miller walked up the steps. Miss Last Name, if you have the data, we do need to secure it, however. We're under no obligation to assist in the interpretation of that data unless you are employed or subpoenaed. Thank you, agent, I said. I looked at Sterling. You want the key? I can give you the key, but the key just opens the door. It doesn't tell you where the bodies are buried. Only I know that, so here's the choice. I give you the key and you take your chances with the feds, or you hire me. Sterling gritted his teeth. Fine, you're rehired. Same salary. Benefits reinstated. I laughed. A harsh, barking laugh. Oh, honey, no. We're way past salary. We're in the realm of consulting fees now. The air on the porch was thick enough to cut with a knife. The birds had stopped singing. Even Mrs. Higgins had put down her binoculars to listen closer. Consulting fees, Sterling repeated, tasting the words like sour milk. How much? I leaned against the doorframe. My standard rate for crisis management and forensic audit defense is $15,000 an hour. Brad choked. 15,000? That's robbery. That's the market rate for saving your ass from federal prison, Brad, I shot back. And there's a 6-hour minimum, paid upfront, cashier's check or direct wire transfer, before I step foot off this porch. That's $90,000, Sterling shouted. For days' work. It's not for the day's work, I said, channeling every old mechanic who ever charged for knowing where to hit the engine with a hammer. It's for the 27 years I spent learning which button to push. It's for the disrespect. It's for pack your trash. It's for the synergy. It's an idiot tax, Mr. Sterling, and you're in a high tax bracket. I looked at Agent Miller. He was trying very hard not to smile. He checked his watch again. We need to get back to the office, gentlemen. The clock is ticking on the document production request. Sterling looked at Miller. He looked at Brad, who was useless. He looked at me. He did the math. $90,000 vs. $480 million audit plus potential fines plus jail time. Fine, Sterling spat. I'll wire it. Give me your account number. I'll wait for the confirmation, I said. Sterling pulled out his phone. His fingers were shaking as he tapped into the corporate banking app. He cursed under his breath. He tapped some more. Sent, he growled. 90,000, now get in the car. I checked my phone. I refreshed my banking app. There it was. Pending deposit, $90,000.00. I'm not getting in your car, I said. I'll drive myself. I don't like the way you drive. You swerve too much. I turned around and walked back into the house. Give me 5 minutes to get dressed. And Brad, don't touch my cactus. I closed the door in their faces. I leaned back against the wood, heart hammering. I did it. I actually did it. I stripped off my robe. I put on my best suit, a sharp, navy blue power suit that made me look like a shark. I put on my heels, click-clack, the sound of war. I grabbed the USB drive from the kitchen counter. I put the IRS in tears mug. I walked out the front door. They were waiting by the cars. Brad looked defeated. Sterling looked furious. Agent Miller looked impressed. Let's go, I said. I'm on the clock. I got into my beat-up Ford Taurus. I cranked the engine. It rumbled. I followed the procession of luxury cars back to the office. When we walked into the lobby, Tiffany, the receptionist, gasped. I walked past her with my head held high. I walked into the elevator with the CEO and the CFO cowering in the corners. We got to the accounting floor. The architects were still there. Looking panicked, when they saw me, it was like they saw Jesus walking on water. Karen, one of them, shouted, "Thank God, the VLOOKUPs aren't working." "Move," I said, pushing past him. I walked to my old desk. The dust outline was still there. I set down my mug. I plugged in the USB drive. I pulled the encryption token from my pocket and inserted it. Beep. Access granted. The screens flickered to life. Rows and rows of beautiful, organized data. The defense strategy, the indexed receipts, the narrative. I turned to Agent Miller. "Agent, the files are unlocked. I prepared a summary of the variances on the Z drive under folder Audit 2023. Shall we begin?" Miller sat down. "We shall." I turned to Brad and Sterling. "You two can leave. The adults are talking." The audit took 3 days. 3 days of me sitting in that conference room, walking Agent Miller through the labyrinth of our financials. I explained the chemical leak payments. I justified the write-offs. I showed him the paper trail that proved the trophy wife shell company had been dissolved and taxed appropriately thanks to me. At the end of day 3, Agent Miller closed his folder. "Well, Miss Last Name, everything seems to be in order. Your documentation is exhaustive." I said, lighting a metaphorical cigarette. "We'll be issuing a no-change letter. No fines, no penalties." Brad, who had been hovering by the door like a bad smell, nearly collapsed with relief. "Oh, thank God. See? Synergy?" Miller looked at Brad. "Son, the only reason you aren't being let out of here in handcuffs for gross negligence is because this woman built a bulletproof vest out of spreadsheets and wrapped you in it. You should be thanking her on your knees." Brad opened his mouth, but Sterling cut him off. Sterling had been watching. He saw the difference between a disruptor and a professional. "Brad," Sterling said, "pack your trash." The room went silent. "What?" Brad whispered. "You're fired," Sterling said. "Get out. Leave the badge." Brad left. He cried. "It was ugly. I didn't watch. I was too busy calculating my invoice." Sterling turned to me. "Karen, come back. CFO, the job is yours. Double your old salary." I looked at him. I looked at the office, the gray walls, the fluorescent lights. The life I had lived for 27 years. "No," I said. Sterling blinked. "Triple, it's not about the money, Sterling," I said. "Okay, it was a little about the money. I'm done. I don't want to be the janitor anymore. I don't want to fix your messes. I'm a consultant now. If you need me, you have my rate, $15,000 an hour." I unplugged my USB drive. I picked up my mug. "I'll see you around, Sterling. Try not to commit any felonies while I'm gone." I walked out. For the last time, that was 3 months ago. I didn't take another job. I took the 90 grand, added it to my savings, and bought a new truck, a real one. I started a small business consulting firm called The Cleaner. I help small businesses survive audits. I work 10 hours a week. I charge a fortune. I heard the company is struggling. The architects messed up the payroll last month. Sterling is calling me every week. I let it go to voicemail. Sometimes on Tuesday mornings, I sit on my porch with my tea and watch the world go by. I think about Brad. Last I heard, he's trying to become a crypto influencer on TikTok. I pruned my roses yesterday. They're blooming, bright red like ink in a ledger. Mrs. Higgins asked me if I miss the office. "Higgins," I said, taking a sip of bourbon at 11 a.m. "I don't miss the circus. But I sure do love watching the clowns fall down." So that's the story. That's how I turned a termination notice into a retirement fund and dismantled a C-suite with a USB stick. Don't mess with the person who knows the passwords. And never, ever, under any circumstances, ask an accountant to pack their trash. Because we might just take the dumpster with us. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.